Hello, this is Brad Blazar, your host of the Learn To Soar Network, where we focus on all things success-related, overcoming your limiting beliefs, focusing on your goals and your dreams. And I am so excited today. We've got an amazing story about a gentleman that actually made it to the top of the world and summited Mount Everest a few years ago. Before we actually introduce and bring Greg onto the show, I thought I would share a little video that takes you along on his tremendous journey.
We finally got on the upper part of the mountain. And I had no idea how hard it was going to be until I actually got above Camp 2. As I was walking the last 500 feet, I was in a state of just disbelief. I was so elated. It was just amazing. I mean, it was in awe with my surroundings. I was in awe with the fact that I made it. When I actually got to the summit and came down not only from the summit to Camp 4, but from Camp 4 to Camp 2, and finally all the way out through the Icefall, which just does a number to anybody's knees, let alone somebody that has artificial knees. And somehow that descent from the very top all the way to base camp was the most incredible day of my life.
I'd like to welcome to the show today an amazing mountaineer and a wonderful businessman, Greg Paul. Greg, welcome to Learn To Soar.
Hi, good to be here.
Fantastic. An amazing story and an amazing journey. There's obviously been a lot of media attention given to the mountain this year. In my book, On the Wings of Eagles, Learning to Soar in Life, we talk about overcoming your limiting beliefs, your challenges, obstacles that are before you. Certainly, there are a lot to get to the top of Mount Everest. Can you speak to some of the challenges and some of the things that you had to overcome, both physically and mentally, in your journey?
Well, as mentioned in the video, I have two artificial knees. When I began my first attempt of Everest, I had just one artificial knee. That was in 2012. And that was a result of let's just say, overusage of my knees in adventurous activities. I was an avid skier, hiker. As a teenager, one of our diversions was jumping off of roofs of houses into the grass. And as a teenager, that worked okay, but you paid for it a few years later. Eventually, when I was around 54, I couldn't even walk downstairs, let alone do a lot of the things I enjoyed doing. So I decided to get one of my knees replaced. And after my first attempt at Mount Everest, I found that I was having a tough time getting down the mountain quick enough. There's an area called the Khumbu Icefall, and the whole idea is to get through that as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you have increased chances of having chunks of ice fall on you or avalanches come down. And I was just too slow because my other knee was beginning to hurt, the one that had not been replaced. So in 2012, after coming back from an unsuccessful attempt of Everest, I had that knee replaced. So that was something I had to deal with. There was a long recovery period. And but that also gave me something to work towards. I wanted to go back and get to the top of Mount Everest and set goals to do so, and that helped me get through my recovery. So that was one major obstacle just to do any mountain, let alone Everest, was getting my knees fixed.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly understand. You know, one of the amazing things is you were actually there in the tragic year where they had an avalanche on the mountain that I believe killed 16 Sherpas. And obviously in the back of your mind, that probably for you really validated the danger of what it's like to be up that high on Mount Everest. But nevertheless, you went back. You had that dream of wanting to reach the summit. So can you talk a little bit about what was going through your mind that year when you were actually there after that tragic avalanche?
Sure. Well, 2012, our team was turned around because of bad conditions. We were getting a lot of ice fall and rock fall in the wrong places. A lot of Sherpas who basically set the mountain up for us. They put the ropes up. They set camps up for us on up on the higher parts of the mountain. They were getting pelted by rock and ice, and our expedition leader just did not feel it was safe enough for our team to go up, and we were basically the first expedition in the history of Everest to be pulled off the mountain before we were able to attempt the summit. Obviously, that was very discouraging to our team. But a few days later, after we were taken down off the mountain and actually returning home, other teams that remained tried to get to the summit, and it was a very short window of opportunity because of the weather. So hundreds of people tried to get up the mountain at the same time, and ended up 11 people died who actually got to the summit and came down. So even though they were on their way down and basically died on their way down, even though they summited. When we heard those stories in the news, our frustration and discouragement turned into relief. That was 2012. I went back in 2014 to attempt again to climb Mount Everest, and that's when a huge avalanche in the Icefall killed 16 Sherpa, the most deadliest season on Mount Everest. That time, everybody, all the expeditions, 34 in total, turned around and went home, and nobody was able to summit that year in respect of those who were killed. And so, yeah, I was on the mountain in basically the two deadliest, most tragic years, and had to make a decision whether I wanted to go back and try again. And that was done in conjunction with, I have 5 children, 15 grandchildren, a wife who wanted me around to be able to play with my grandchildren as they got older. And it was a joint decision there that we had to make, and ended up going back with the support of my wife. However, she did caution me, 3rd time's a charm, or 3 strikes, you're out.
Certainly, I can certainly understand. One thing that you and I spoke to prior to our episode today is not only knowing yourself and your limitations, Greg, but understanding that making it to the summit of Mount Everest is really more about a journey. And that a lot of people overlook the fact that when you're there at the top, you're only halfway home. Can you speak to that and kind of what was going through your mind when you and your Sherpa finally made it to the top of the summit? I believe that the two of you were there for a moment by yourselves, but also understanding, like you said earlier, that many people do reach the summit and then obviously expire on the way down due to the physical exhaustion, the lack of oxygen. So talk to me about the journey of making that round trip so that you can share the story, like you said, with your grandkids, with your children, and, of course, with the media.
Right. Well, let's break down that question. And if I get off track, reel me back in. But first, let's talk about the journey. Although I was really discouraged when we were pulled off the mountain in 2012, I mean, you spend a lot of money, you go through a lot of training. I did a lot of things that were to get ready for Mount Everest that normally you don't do in life, like sleep in a tent at home that you put around a bed, and it brings the oxygen level down within the tent to replicate being at high altitudes, as high as 18,000 feet. It's not easy to sleep in that tent. But it got me ready mentally and physically for those high altitudes. My wife refused to sleep in that bed with me, so that was a 2-month adventure in and of itself. Other things, just getting up early in the morning, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I live in Utah, where in the wintertime it's quite cold, and you have to train in the winter here because you leave in mid-March to go to Everest. And I was climbing the local mountains when it was below zero and snowing. And when I wasn't outside training, I was inside stepping up onto a 24-inch wooden box with a 40, 50-pound backpack on my back, not 100 times, not 200 times, but 1,000 times. It took me over 2 hours to do that. That's a lot of boredom and hard work, but that's what climbing Mount Everest is. It's one step in front of another, and it's monotonous. So part of the journey was the training. I felt after the discouragement of 2012 and the disaster that happened in 2014, and then going back actually in 2015 after there was a disastrous earthquake and another disastrous year on Everest where nobody climbed again because 19 people were killed in an avalanche that went through base camp in 2015. I went and climbed another mountain in Nepal, unsuccessful because of avalanche danger. But during this entire 4-year process, I actually went back in 2013 as well, but won't get into too many details. Another unsuccessful summit. So 4 years of unsuccessful summits, but those 4 years were the most amazing 4 years of my life because I got to know my team, the Sherpa team, my expedition leader. I got to understand the culture over there. Had I summited my first year, I would never have had the opportunity to get to know the people over there and my team as I did being over there for 4 years. And that I'm very grateful for because the journey in mountaineering is much more than just a summit. It is learning about your surroundings. It's getting to know the people that you're with and those people that are helping you make that journey. And so that's part of the journey. As far as getting to the summit, you point out, well, there's a saying, the summit is only halfway. The summit isn't the finish line. I think a lot of people confuse big life events as the finish line, but the finish line is actually what you do after arriving at the summit. The finish line is getting home. Absolutely. It's surviving the entire journey. A lot of people who climb Mount Everest, and it was exhibited this year and many past years, they use up their full tank of gas to get to the summit. And they don't have anything left once they get there, and they have a celebration. Their adrenaline is high at the top. It's the highlight of their life, but it is also sometimes the end of their life. It could be the best day and the worst day of their life if they die there, which sometimes happens on the way back down. Sure. And again, this year, 11 people died, and most of them died on the way down after a successful summit. So success and summiting don't always equate.
I certainly understand. It has been a tough, challenging year, certainly on the mountain. No doubt about it. We're seeing that in the media. As you're going through that journey and as you're going up, there are certain parts of the mountain, I'm sure, that through self-reflection and just through all of the physical training, bring memories to you as you think about it, whether it's reaching the South Col or whether it's making it up to the Hillary Steps. Matter of fact, I believe we have a picture or two of you that I'd like to share of you going across a crevasse and also the Hillary Steps. Maybe you can speak to that as well. But what is the physically most demanding part on the mountain?
Well, I'll just quickly take you through the process. The first place you go through right out of base camp is probably one of the most dangerous 1.5 miles on the face of the earth. It's called the Khumbu Icefall. It's moving ice, the size of houses and buildings, and you're meandering through there following a rope. Oftentimes there's 30, 40, 50 ladders that you have to walk across or climb up to get you over and around the obstacles, over crevasses that are so deep that you look down and it's totally black. And you've got to walk over those, and at times you're hearing avalanches in the distance and rumblings and the earth is shaking. That can be quite harrowing, but you get used to it. It's like going into a battle zone, and you've got to just accept the fact that the outcome may not be favorable, but you've got to just move forward and do it. You can't stop. You can't turn around. That's not an option. On one of my journeys through the Icefall, and you go through it 4 to 6 times as you attempt Mount Everest, because you have to go through it before you even summit to acclimatize. You go up and down the mountain a few times, not all the way to the top, but up to about 23,000 feet before you actually go for the summit. You lose a lot of weight when you're up there, and I found that, well, I lost about 26 pounds, and on one of my journeys through the Icefall, my clothes had become very loose because of my losing weight, and I was coming down a ladder, and my pants actually fell down to my ankles as I was coming down the ladder because I had a harness on that was weighed down. It just pulled my pants down to my ankles, and I couldn't move my feet very well. I was hoping that people weren't looking at me. And in fact, this ladder was one that had stopped being used. I got off track, and I got to the bottom of the ladder. It wasn't touching the ground. It was just above a deep hole in the ground. And I had to work my way back up that ladder with my pants at my ankles and get back on track. That was actually one of the scariest moments on Everest, and embarrassing had I actually not make it. I didn't want to be found with my pants.
You didn't want to die with your pants around your ankles.
That's not the story I wanted to be told about myself. But I made it through that, and after the Khumbu Icefall, one of the most, I'd say, painful parts is, if you were just to look at pictures of it, not a very steep part of Mount Everest. In fact, maybe it's a 10, at most 20% grade called the Western Khum, and that's between Camp 1 and Camp 2. But you're in this big nature's refractor oven. You've got on all sides of you mile-high walls of ice and snow that reflect the sun. It gets over 100 degrees in that part of your climb, and you're wearing a heavy down suit that keeps you warm and even 40 below zero, but you can't take that off and remove any clothing because the sun is so strong that it would literally give you second-degree burns. So you're going through 100-degree heat, but you're wearing heavy clothes, and it is very, very uncomfortable. And the worst part of the journey for me was going through that and what it does to you mentally and physically. After that, you go up the Lhotse face, which is a nearly mile of 60-degree or steeper ice that you are connected to a rope, and you have in your hand what's called an ascender that's attached to the rope, and you pretty much have to climb up. You're attached to the rope, and if you ever make a mistake on that wall, become detached and slip, you slide to your death. And that was probably one of the I'd say most challenging parts of the climb, just due to the exposure that you had and the possibility of making a mistake. Then you get to the South Col, and you're in what's called the death zone. That's the area above 26,000 feet, where you've got about 24 hours before your body completely shuts down and you die. Your body is literally in a state of dying at that altitude because of the lack of oxygen.
Sure.
The clock is ticking. But when I got there in 2016, I could not believe that I was actually there. In fact, I went back thinking, because of my track record, that I probably wasn't going to summit. I just had such bad luck in my 4 years of climbing that I just felt that would continue. But when I got to 26,000 feet, I pinched myself in disbelief, because I knew at that point I had a chance. And that was just an overwhelming feeling. But it was also the trepidation and concern that you have, because now you're where people had died, and there's
Sure.
over 250 bodies on the mountain between Camp 4 and the top of the mountain. It's where a lot of people, met their maker, and that's going on in your head. You don't get much sleep at that altitude. You don't have an appetite. You wake up at midnight, in our case, and I left at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was the last one out of base camp. Takes a little while for my knees to warm up and get the equipment on that you need to get on before you get out of your tent. So I was the last one out, and I could see other teams and my own teammates well ahead of me going up a steep part of the mountain. You could see headlamps going up, and I felt really anxious because of being last, and kind of disappointed in myself. But fortunately, with the help of the Sherpa that was guiding me, Noan Tenzing Sherpa, we were able to catch up to the crowd. And actually, by the time we were above the balcony, which is at 27,500 feet, I had passed half the people that had been in front of me. There was a total of 35 people. And about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I was ahead of most of the people now. And then a storm hit us out of nowhere. You couldn't see 50 feet in front of you.
Wow.
And at that point, most of the people that were on the mountain sort of sat down and wondered what they were going to do, waiting for instructions from their expedition leader and the Sherpas that were on the mountain. There was a lot of confusion, but the Sherpa that I was with knew that if you stop moving on Everest, you start dying.
Yeah.
And we kept going, and that kept our blood circulating. It kept us warm, and we passed everybody on the mountain at that point. And we got to the south summit, which is now just a mere 200 vertical feet from the summit and about 4 football fields in distance. And at that point, the storm was still raging. The radios were going wild with conversation, and our expedition leader, I felt, was about to pull the plug on us. But I could see the Hillary step through the storm, and I at least wanted to get there. I wanted that is like, for any climber, that is, a holy landmark. And I at least wanted to get there before we got pulled off the mountain. So I tapped our Sherpa on the shoulder, my Noan Tenzing Sherpa, who equally had a desire to get to the top as I
Sure.
did. And we felt good. Even though the storm was raging around us, we felt fine within the heavy summit suit that we were in, and our oxygen mask. Everything was green light, go ahead. So we continued along the Cornice Ridge, which drops off 11,000 feet to your right, and about a foot to your left, it drops off about 8,000 feet. Luckily, I can only see about 50 feet down because of the storm. And we got to the Hillary Step, and so far, systems were green still, and we go up the Hillary Step, about a 40-foot steep snow ramp, and got to what's called the summit ramp. Now we're only about 500 feet from the actual summit. At that point, your mind is like, I could die here,
Yeah.
but I feel good, but I wonder what's going to go wrong,
Sure.
you know. But I continued forward, and no one turned to me and pointed, and I could hear him through the oxygen mask and the wind, and that he just said summit. And I'm looking up, and I couldn't see much of anything. And then we were there on this little knob. I had no view of anything. It was just a complete whiteout. But the feeling was totally amazing to be in the middle of a raging storm at 29,034 feet, and actually I was alive.
Yep.
And it was the most amazing feeling to be able to do that after the 4 years of failures. When you have a success like that after repeated failures, the success feels all the more gratifying.
Absolutely, I'm sure. Yeah, I believe we have a picture of you at the summit with your Sherpa that we can share. And then, of course, the other thing is people don't realize really the team that's behind you that actually takes you to the top. You had an amazing photograph of all of the Sherpas, the people in the expedition that we like to share. And for the 5 people that were actually on the team, there's probably, 30, 35 people that are actually behind that in terms of the expedition leaders, the people at base camp on the radios, the people, of course, that are there alongside you to, monitor your safety and your well-being. Truly an unbelievable story. Talk to me just very briefly, and we've only got about another 4 to 5 minutes, Greg, about the problems of the mountain today. The media has played it out to just be these long lines, but you and I know through an article that was actually put out and emailed to you from Mr. Bryce, who really has led multiple expeditions, that it's not just that, it's the lack of coordination between multiple agencies over in Nepal. It's the corruption. There's other issues really that are leading to some of those problems that we're seeing. Can you comment on that as well?
Well, Nepal is one of the poorest, if not poorest, countries in the world. It's definitely a third world country, and the average wage over there is $400 per year when you average it out over everybody that lives there. So the Sherpas are no different. They live up in the mountains. If it wasn't for Everest climbers and trekkers over there, they'd live a subsistence living up there of growing potatoes and cabbage and what have you. So we climbers really, they rely on us to come and give them an ability to earn an income and put their kids through school, so their kids hopefully aren't forced to go climb a mountain with Westerners who think climbing mountains are something fun to do. The Sherpas see those mountains as their holy ground and where gods exist. So their first thought isn't, oh, we want to go climb mountains. They do it for a job.
Sure.
And if they had other jobs, they would likely take those before they would climbing a mountain. You have a lot of Nepalese companies now stepping into the guiding game that didn't exist 3, 4, 10 years ago. It was mostly Western companies that provided the guiding services, but this is their home turf. This is their mountains, and they felt they had a right, and they felt they had the knowledge to be able to start doing their own expeditions. Unfortunately, it's a business, and they have to get off the ground, and they need to hire people to take people like myself up that mountain, and experience is the name of the game on Everest, and it takes a while to build that experience. Just because you're a Sherpa doesn't mean you can climb a mountain. A Sherpa is a nationality. It's not a job name. And there's plenty of Sherpa out there that have never climbed any mountains, and they need to train and do the same thing that any climber does to get ready for that mountain. But these new expedition companies have to hire inexperienced people, and oftentimes the climbers who want to go over there can't differentiate between a new company and one that has a lot of experience, because anybody can come up with a good website. And
Sure.
there's no accountability. If an expedition company loses somebody because they didn't have experienced Sherpas up there to determine when they should turn around, they don't have the responsibility to put that out in the limelight. So there needs to be more accountability. There needs to be obviously more coordination with other groups to be able to monitor the process or progress of people climbing the mountain, so you don't get the huge lines. But number one, though, it's up to really God and nature, because the weather is the number one determining factor in those years where there's been disasters, because you can either have 12 to 15 days when you can get to the summit if the weather gods are favorable, or it could be as little as 1 or 2 days. And if you've got 300, 400 people that all want to get to the summit, no amount of coordination can work it out to where you can get that many people up in 2 days. And that's what happened this year. So there's got to be, expedition companies have to be able to have the ability to say, no, we're not going to go. Yeah. And that's the hardest thing to do. Russell Bryce did that in 2012, but people need to be able to do that more regularly, even though it may be discouraging for the members of the expedition. It turns into part of the journey, and like me, they may actually be grateful that they have that opportunity to go back and try again.
Sure. No, it's a wonderful point, and I think it's something that you probably appreciate much more, having gone back time and time again. It's not just the journey, it's not just getting to the summit, but it's now really looking at that community of Sherpas and the people that were part of your team as family and as friends, and people that you'll have that relationship with for the rest of your life. We got to wrap it up. I just want to say, Greg, an amazing story, an amazing individual. Greg is not only an accomplished mountaineer, but also a tremendous businessman, the co-founder of Momentum Indoor Climbing in Utah and in Texas. I've been to their facilities. They are just absolutely fantastic. If you have any ambitions of rock climbing, this is a place to do it, folks. This is your host, Brad Blazar of Learn To Soar, where we focus on all things success. Thanks again, Greg. Until next time, goodbye.